The battlefield had fallen into uneasy silence, broken only by the distant rumble of collapsing ruins and the hiss of burning wreckage. Human soldiers stood in awe around Commander Rylan Kane, who still gripped his blade, its edge dripping dark, alien blood. For a moment it seemed as if victory had been won, but in truth the humans knew this was only the beginning. Above them, in the ash-filled sky, shadows moved. More Valar ships descended through the clouds like predators circling their prey. Rylan wiped his blade clean on the armor of the fallen champion, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He knew his men were watching him, waiting for his command. He also knew they were exhausted, wounded, and afraid. But as he looked at them, standing together despite the odds, he felt the same fire that had carried him through the duel burn, stronger than ever. "We don't run," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the broken plain. "We hold this ground. If they want it, they'll have to take it over our bodies. And if I fall, then you keep standing. That's what it means, to be human." The soldiers raised their weapons and shouted in reply, not with fear but with defiance. Their voices, raw and hoarse, rang out like a battle cry. Rylan knew they were outnumbered, but he also knew something else. The Valar had seen what had happened here. They had seen their champion fall, and fear, even if small, had entered their dark hearts. From her vantage point, Princess Seraphis Valar watched with unblinking eyes. She had never seen her people hesitate before, yet now she saw them shifting, uncertain. The human's courage was like a fire spreading through dry wood, and she could not tear her gaze away. When her guards looked at her, confused by her earlier words, she silenced them with a glance. They would not understand. No one would, but she understood. She had found something rare, something powerful, something she could not ignore. As the next wave of Valar soldiers descended, the humans prepared themselves. Rylan stood at the front, blade raised, ready to fight again. But before the battle could begin, a voice thundered across the battlefield. It was a voice heavy with command, one that made even the fiercest Valar tremble. Enough. From the clouds above descended a massive warship, black as the void, its wings stretching wide across the sky. The ground shook as it hovered, and from its belly, a platform lowered. Upon it stood the Queen of the Valar herself, towering, regal, her crimson eyes glowing with cold fury. The human soldiers froze. To them, she was not just a ruler, but a nightmare made flesh. Even the bravest among them felt their courage falter at the sight of her. But Rylan stood tall, refusing to bow his head. His hand gripped his weapon tighter, though he knew he could not hope to defeat her. The Queen's gaze fell on him, and for a long moment, silence ruled the battlefield. Then she spoke, her voice cutting like ice. "A mortal dares kill one of my chosen. You should not exist. Yet here you stand, defiant, as if your life carries weight." Rylan's jaw tightened. "I don't care what you call me, I'm human, that's enough." The Queen's lips curled into a smile that carried no warmth. She raised her hand, and before Rylan could move, shadowy tendrils wrapped around him, pulling him from the ground and dragging him through the air. His soldiers cried out, but none could help him as he was lifted onto the platform. The Queen studied him as if he were an insect caught in a web. Seraphis stepped forward, her heart pounding as she saw him captured. She wanted to speak, to claim him, but her mother's presence silenced even her bold tongue. Yet when the Queen turned her eyes toward her daughter, she saw something in Seraphis's gaze. Curiosity, interest, something dangerous. "You look at him as if he were more than prey," the Queen said softly, though the sharpness of her tone cut like a blade. "Explain yourself, child." Seraphis felt the eyes of the entire court upon her, the guards, the nobles, the soldiers. She knew the cost of her words, but she refused to deny her heart. With steady breath, she answered, "He is not prey. He is different. He is mine." A gasp went through the Valar surrounding them. Even the human soldiers below, though unable to hear every word, could sense something strange in the way the princess looked at their commander. The Queen's expression hardened. "Yours? You dare claim a human, a thing meant only for war and feeding?" "He is not a thing," Seraphis replied, her voice firm. "He stood against a champion and did not break. He is stronger than any I have seen. I want him." Rylan, still bound by shadows, could barely believe what he was hearing. A princess of the enemy empire was speaking of him as though he were valuable. He did not know if this was some cruel game, but he kept his face hard, unwilling to show weakness before either of them. The queen turned her gaze back to him, studying him once more. For a long, tense moment, she said nothing. Then she released the shadows, letting him drop to his knees. "Very well," she said at last. "If my daughter sees something in you, then prove it. Prove your worth in the trial of shadows. If you survive, you will live. If you fail, you will die, and she will learn the foolishness of her desire." Seraphis lowered her eyes briefly, hiding the flicker of relief that passed through her. Her mother could have executed him then and there, but she had chosen instead to test him. It was a chance, however slim. Rylan rose to his feet, his body aching, his breath ragged. He did not know what this trial of shadows was, but he saw the hunger in the queen's eyes, the way she expected him to fail. He also saw the strange light in the princess's gaze, the way she looked at him not with scorn but with something else. Admiration, hope. He spat blood onto the platform and stood tall. "If you want me to fight, then I'll fight. I don't care what you throw at me, I'll survive because I'm human and we don't break." The queen's lips curved into a cold smile. So be it. The platform rose back into the warship, carrying Rylan, Seraphis, and the queen away from the battlefield. The human soldiers below could only watch in helpless silence as their commander disappeared into the sky. Yet even in their fear, a strange pride burned in them. Their commander had faced the enemy queen herself and had not bowed. Inside the warship, Rylan was thrown into a chamber of cold metal, guarded by silent warriors. He sat against the wall, his blade taken from him, but his spirit unbroken. He knew the odds were against him, but he also knew something else. He had seen doubt in the eyes of the Valar. He had seen interest in the eyes of their princess. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was more than just survival. And somewhere in the darkness of the ship, Seraphis whispered to herself, a vow only she could hear. "You will not fall, I will not let you." The battlefield was covered in smoke and fire, a broken land where the ground itself seemed to bleed from endless fighting. Metallic debris from war machines burned in scattered heaps, and the sky above was filled with the thunder of starships, exchanging fire. Among the chaos stood Commander Rylan Kane, a human warrior who had long since stopped feeling fear in the heat of war. His armor was battered, his blade chipped, yet his eyes burned with the determination that had carried him through countless battles. The enemy he faced was no ordinary foe. The Valar were creatures feared across the galaxy, tall, pale, and sharp as shadows. They were called vampire lords by other species, for they thrived on consuming the energy of life itself, and their presence was enough to freeze most soldiers in terror. Yet Rylan stood firm as a towering Valar champion stalked toward him, wings spreading wide, eyes glowing crimson in the smoke. The alien warrior's voice echoed, cold and sharp, promising a quick death. But Rylan did not back down. He lifted his blade, cracked a grim smile, and lunged forward with a roar that was not only defiance but also the sound of a human refusing to bow. The clash was brutal. The Valar champion swung with supernatural speed, his claws striking sparks from Rylan's armor, yet the human adapted, ducked, countered, and drove his strikes with sheer stubborn will. Blow after blow shook the battlefield, each clash of steel and claw sending echoes across the ruined plain. Other soldiers paused to watch, even in the middle of their own struggles. It was rare for anyone, let alone a human, to last more than a moment against a Valar champion. Yet Rylan not only survived, he fought back with equal ferocity. Every time he was knocked down, he rose again. Every wound he took became another reason to strike harder. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with determination that no alien power could crush. Finally, with a roar that tore through the battlefield, Rylan struck the champion's chest with his blade, piercing deep. The alien stumbled, shocked that a mortal man had bested him and fell to the ground. For the first time in living memory, a human had slain one of the Empire's chosen champions in single combat. The battlefield grew silent for a heartbeat, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the impossible. High above, watching from the shadows of a shattered spire, Princess Seraphis Valar gazed down with burning eyes. She had come not to fight, but to observe the war her people waged against the Accord. As heir to the Valar throne, she had seen countless battles, endless streams of prey and soldiers all falling before her kind. To her, all lesser species were weak, predictable, fragile. And yet here, on this broken world, a single human had shattered that belief. Her gaze lingered on him, on the way he stood even after victory, bloodied and battered but unbroken. There was no fear in him, no trembling before the might of her people. He was different. Fascination stirred in her chest, something she could not name at first. But when she saw him raise his weapon high, rallying the remaining human soldiers to stand and fight again, she understood. This was not prey. This was something more. Her voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the silence of her escorting guards. She spoke words that none had ever expected from a princess of the Valar. "I want this human." The guards turned in shock, unsure if they had heard correctly, but Seraphis's eyes never left Rylan. She felt no shame in her declaration. While her mother, the queen, demanded loyalty to blood and tradition, Seraphis saw something greater in this human. He had done what no alien could. He had fought without fear, and in doing so, he had carved his name into her thoughts. Down below, Rylan had no idea who watched him. He only knew that the battle was not over. More Valar forces were arriving, their wings blotting out the sky as they descended. The human soldiers rallied around him, looking to him not just as a commander but as a symbol. He could see the fear in their eyes, but he could also see the spark of hope. If one man could defeat a champion, then perhaps survival was not a dream. Rylan tightened his grip on his blade and called out to his soldiers. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of fire. "Stand with me. For every one of us. Who falls, another will rise. We are not broken, we are human." The cheer that followed was not loud, but it was fierce, echoing through the ruins. The Valar soldiers hissed and bared their fangs, yet even they hesitated at the sight of humans, standing firm instead of fleeing. Fear was their weapon, but these humans had found something stronger to carry them forward. Seraphis leaned forward, her fangs catching the dim light. She had been raised to see humans as cattle, as tools of war, but now she could not deny the truth her eyes showed her. Rylan Cain was no ordinary human. He was proof that her people's arrogance was flawed, and in her heart, a decision began to form, one that would shake the foundations of her empire. The night wore on, the battle shifting, yet the image of the human warrior stayed with her. She imagined standing beside him, not as predator and prey, but as equals. The thought was dangerous, forbidden, but thrilling in ways she could not explain. Her mother would never approve. The court would never allow it. But Seraphis did not care. She wanted him, not as a possession, but as someone who had shown her a truth she had long been blind to. And so, as the fires of war burned across the battlefield, and the fate of countless lives hung in balance, the vampire princess made her choice in silence. She would have the human warrior, no matter what it cost. The warship drifted silently through the stars, its black hull glowing faintly with red veins of energy. Inside, Commander Rylan Cain sat in a dark chamber, chains binding his wrists and ankles. He did not know how much time had passed since his capture, but the cold air of the ship never changed. He could not see the stars, nor hear the cries of his men left behind, yet he refused to let despair touch him. His body was weary, his wounds burned, but his spirit burned hotter. When the heavy doors finally opened, he lifted his head. Two tall, Valar guards entered, their pale skin reflecting the crimson glow of their armor. They released his chains and pulled him to his feet. He staggered but did not fall. His jaw was clenched, his eyes steady, and though he was unarmed, he walked with the same stubborn pride that had carried him across 100 battlefields. They dragged him through long halls carved with strange symbols, walls pulsing faintly, as if the ship itself were alive. At the end of the hall, a vast chamber opened, lit by a ceiling of shifting shadows. High above sat the Queen of the Valar, her throne carved from black stone, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Around her gathered nobles and generals, their wings folded, their whispers filling the air like the hiss of serpents. And beside her, standing tall in silver robes, was Princess Seraphis. Her gaze fell upon Rylan the moment he entered, and though her face remained calm, her heart raced. She could not show weakness, not before her mother, not before the court. But inside she felt every step the human took, as if it were her own. The Queen's voice cut through the silence. The human will face the trial of shadows. He will enter the labyrinth of fear, where illusions twist the mind and monsters feed on weakness. If he survives, he will be judged. If he fails, his death will remind my daughter of her foolishness. A murmur swept through the court, some laughing softly, others shaking their heads. None believed a human could survive. But Rylan stood tall, his eyes never leaving the Queen's. "Then open your trial," he said. "I'll walk through it, and when I come out you'll see why your daughter believes in me." The nobles hissed at his boldness, but the Queen only smiled thinly. With a gesture, the floor of the chamber shifted, revealing a dark pit beneath. From it rose a mist that chilled the air, heavy with whispers and unseen movement. The trial of shadows was ready. Rylan was pushed forward. He did not resist. He stepped into the darkness, the mist curling around him like living hands. The pit swallowed him, and soon he was gone from sight. Inside the trial, the air was thick and heavy. Darkness pressed in on all sides, broken only by faint glimmers of light that flickered and vanished. Rylan could hear footsteps that were not his own, whispers that sounded like the voices of people he had lost. He knew it was an illusion, a trick meant to break his will. But that knowledge did not make it easier. His breath grew heavy, his heart pounded, yet he pressed forward. The shadows shifted, and before him appeared the figure of his old commander, a man long dead, who had fallen in a battle years ago. The man's eyes glowed red, his voice twisted. "You could not save me, Rylan. You let me die. You lead men to their deaths. That is all you are." Rylan's chest tightened. The memory was real, the guilt heavy. But he shook his head and clenched his fists. "You're not him. You're just a shadow. I carry the dead with me, but I don't break because of them. I fight for them." He swung his fist, and the image shattered into mist. The path twisted again, walls of black stone rising, high, covered in strange carvings that seemed to move when he looked at them. Creatures crawled from the darkness, tall and thin, their faces hollow, their claws sharp. They hissed and rushed at him. Rylan had no sword, no gun, nothing but his bare hands. Still, he did not run. He caught the first creature's wrist, twisted, and drove his knee into its chest. It burst into smoke. Another leaped at him, and he tackled it to the ground, smashing its face until it dissolved. Every monster he fought vanished like a lie broken by truth, but each battle drained his strength further. High above in the court, the Queen and her nobles watched the images of the trial projected in the air. They laughed when he stumbled, sneered when he bled. But Seraphis's eyes never left him. She saw the way he fought, not just with strength, but with stubborn refusal to quit. Her chest tightened with pride, though she kept her face still. She leaned toward her mother. "Do you see it now? He does not give up. He is unlike any prey." The Queen gave her a sharp look. "He is stubborn, yes, but stubbornness is not strength. Watch, child. The shadows will break him." Back in the labyrinth, Rylan staggered forward, his body bruised, his breath ragged. The whispers grew louder, filling his ears with voices. Of his family, his soldiers, every face he had ever failed to protect. They accused him, mocked him, told him he was nothing. For a moment his knees buckled and darkness pressed closer, eager to consume him. Then faintly he heard another voice. It was soft, almost hidden in the storm of whispers. A voice that did not accuse but urged him on. "Stand, human. Do not fall. It was Seraphis's voice. Somehow, across the veil of the trial, her words had reached him. He did not know if it was real or only in his mind, but it gave him strength. He clenched his fists, forced himself to rise, and shouted into the darkness. I am Rylan Kane. I don't break. I fight, and I keep fighting until the last breath leaves my body. The shadows recoiled, hissing as light burst from within him. It was not fire, not energy, but sheer will, burning bright enough to push back the dark. The creatures dissolved, the whispers faded, and the path opened before him. At last he emerged from the labyrinth. His body was covered in sweat and blood, his breath heavy, but he stood tall. The chamber erupted in noise, some nobles hissing, in anger, others silent in shock. No human had ever survived the trial of shadows, yet here he was, alive, unbroken. The queen leaned forward, her eyes narrow. Impossible, she whispered, but she could not deny what she saw. Seraphis stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. He has proved himself. He is not weak. He is worthy. The queen's gaze flicked between her daughter and the human. For the first time, doubt flickered in her expression. She had expected failure, humiliation, death. Instead, she saw strength that could not be denied. Rylan looked up at her, his chest rising with every breath, and met her gaze without fear. I told you, humans don't break. The court was silent. For the first time in living memory, a human had stood before the Queen of the Valar and made her court pause. And though she said nothing, though her expression remained cold, in the shadows of her mind, the queen began to wonder if her daughter had not been entirely wrong. The silence in the throne chamber lasted long after Rylan had stepped out of the trial of shadows. His chest rose and fell, his body shaking with exhaustion, yet his eyes burned bright. The nobles whispered to each other, unable to believe what they had seen. A human had survived the trial. It had never happened before. Even some of the oldest Valar, warriors who had lived for centuries, stared at him with uneasy expressions. The queen leaned back on her throne, her crimson eyes narrow. Her long fingers tapped against the black stone, each sound echoing like a drumbeat. She did not speak at first. Her silence was worse than her anger, and the court waited in dread. Finally, her cold voice cut through the air. You survived, she said, but survival is not victory. You remain immortal, fragile, and fleeting. Do not mistake stubbornness for greatness. Rylan lifted his chin. I didn't survive for you. I survived because I don't give up. You can call it weakness if you like, but I call it being human. The queen's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes were like blades. You speak boldly, human. Perhaps too boldly. She turned her gaze toward her daughter. And you, Seraphis. Your heart grows reckless. You speak of him as if he were more than prey. Such foolishness ends now. If you wish to prove yourself my heir, you will kill him with your own hands. A gasp rippled through the chamber. Rylan froze, his hand clenching. Seraphis did not move, but inside her heart thundered. Her mother's words were a command, not a request. To defy the queen was to invite death. Yet when she looked at Rylan, standing tall and unbroken even in chains, she felt the same fire that had first stirred in her chest. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it struck the court like lightning. The queen's eyes narrowed, her presence filling the chamber like a storm. No? Seraphis stepped forward, her silver robes flowing around her. Her voice was calm but firm. I will not kill him. He has shown strength no other has. To destroy him is to destroy proof that there is more to this galaxy than our arrogance. He is worthy, Mother. Worthy not only of life but of standing beside me. The court erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted, some in outrage, others in disbelief. The guards shifted uneasily, waiting for the queen's command. Rylan's heart pounded, not from fear but from shock. The princess was not hiding her defiance anymore. She was declaring it before the entire empire. The queen rose from her throne, her wings unfolding like a storm cloud. Her voice thundered across the hall. You dare defy me? You would betray your people for a human? Seraphis met her gaze without flinching. I would betray nothing. I would save us from a future built on pride and cruelty. Look around you, Mother. Fear is all. We inspire, but this human, he inspires something greater. Hope, unity. If we destroy that, we destroy ourselves. The queen's fury shook the walls, but Seraphis's words had already planted seeds of doubt. Among the court, whispers spread. Some sneered, but others looked thoughtful. Could it be true? Could a human truly represent something greater than the endless cycle of blood and conquest? Rylan watched the struggle unfold, his chain still binding him, but his voice cutting through the noise. She's right. You can keep ruling through fear, but fear fades. Hope doesn't. That's what makes us dangerous. That's why I'm still standing. The queen's eyes burned as she raised her hand, shadows gathering like storm clouds. Enough. If you will not obey Seraphis, then you are no daughter of mine. Before the shadows could strike, Seraphis spread her wings, wide, her own power flaring like silver fire. The court fell silent at the sight. Princess against queen, heir against ruler. It was unthinkable, yet it was happening before their eyes. I am your daughter, Seraphis said, her voice ringing like steel. But I am not your shadow. I will not be a copy of your cruelty. If you want me to kill him, then you will have to kill me first. The queen's eyes widened, not in fear but in fury. Her power lashed out, but in that moment Rylan broke his chains. With a roar, he threw himself between them, blocking the wave of shadow with nothing but his body. The force hurled him across the floor, pain ripping through him. Yet he rose. Again his teeth clenched. The court gasped. Even chained, even broken, he stood in defiance of the queen herself. The image struck something deep in the Valar who watched. They had been raised to see humans as fragile prey, but this one refused to fall. The queen snarled, her fury growing. Guards! Kill him! But as the guards moved, Seraphis raised her voice, sharp as a blade. Stand down! Half the guards froze, caught between loyalty to their queen and their princess. The chamber shook as the two sides clashed. Some obeyed the queen and moved against Rylan, while others, uncertain, lowered their weapons. For the first time in centuries, the unity of the Valar cracked. Rylan fought with nothing but his fists and stolen blades, each strike driven by survival and fury. Seraphis stood at his side, her power blazing as she shielded him from the worst of her mother's attacks. The court turned into chaos, wings beating, shadows clashing with silver light. The queen descended from her throne, her power dark as night. She struck at Rylan, forcing him to his knees. Seraphis countered, her energy slamming into her mother's. The clash shook the chamber, sending cracks through the walls. Rylan rose again, blood on his lips, his voice hoarse. I don't care if you're a queen. I won't let you break her, and I won't let you break me. Seraphis looked at him, her heart pounding. In that moment, she knew she had chosen rightly. This human was not prey. He was her equal. The queen roared, her wings spreading wide. Then you will both die. The battle that followed spread beyond the throne chamber. News of the rebellion raced through the ship and across the empire. Some Valar remained loyal to the queen, but others, tired of endless war and cruelty, began to whisper of change. They spoke of the human who had survived the trial and the princess who stood beside him. They began to believe in something new. Through fire and shadow, Rylan and Seraphis fought side by side. He struck with raw courage, she with burning power, their bond growing stronger with every moment. They were two against an empire, yet neither faltered. At last, as the queen's fury reached its peak, Seraphis faced her directly. Mother against daughter, ruler against heir. Their clash lit the hall with crimson and silver, power shaking the very walls. Rylan, battered but unbroken, stood with her, his presence giving her the strength to keep fighting. The court watched in awe and fear, realizing the truth. The old order was breaking. A new dawn was coming, one built not on fear but on defiance, hope and something no Valar had ever believed possible, love between predator and prey. The queen's roar echoed through the halls, But even as shadows surrounded them, Ryland's voice rose above it all, carrying the same fire that had carried him from the battlefield to this moment. We are human. We don't give up. And with her, I'll fight until the stars burn out. The words struck deeper than any blade. And in that moment, the Empire itself began to tremble. The throne chamber was a storm of chaos. Shadows clashed with silver light, the Queen's fury lashing out in waves that cracked stone and bent steel. Seraphis stood at the center, her wings spread, her eyes glowing with determination. Beside her, Ryland bled from a dozen wounds, yet his spirit was unbroken. He gripped a blade torn from a fallen guard, his body shaking, but his stance firm. The Queen struck again, her power slamming into the ground, sending both of them stumbling. Her voice thundered, filled with rage and disbelief. You betray me, Seraphis. You betray your blood, your people, your throne. Seraphis steadied herself, her silver fire burning brighter. No, Mother. I betray your cruelty. I betray fear. But I do not betray our people. I fight for a future they cannot yet imagine. Ryland's voice, hoarse but strong, carried across the hall. And she's not alone. The two of them charged together. Seraphis's fire struck against her mother's shadow, sparks of light and darkness colliding in bursts that blinded the court. Ryland moved through the storm, his blade flashing as he cut down guards who still fought for the Queen. Every time he fell, he forced himself up again, his stubborn refusal inspiring even some of the watching Valar to hesitate. For the first time in centuries, the Queen was pushed back. Her fury grew wilder, her shadows deeper, but her control slipped. Seraphis's strength did not come from fear, but from choice, from her heart, from the human who refused to leave her side. At last, Seraphis and her mother met in the center of the hall, their wings beating, their powers colliding in one final clash. The ground shook, the walls split, and the court scattered in terror. Ryland stood close, his blade ready, his eyes never leaving Seraphis. He knew this was her fight, but he would not let her fight alone. The Queen roared, her voice shaking the air. You are weak. You are blinded by this mortal. Seraphis's voice answered with fire. No, Mother, I see more clearly than you ever did. With one final surge, she broke through her mother's shadows, her silver fire piercing the Queen's chest. The older woman staggered, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a heartbeat, silence filled the chamber. Then the Queen collapsed, her power fading into the air like smoke. The court was stunned. The Queen of the Valar, who had ruled through fear for centuries, had fallen. And standing above her was Seraphis, wings spread, light shining from her like dawn breaking through night. Slowly, she turned to face the court. Her voice was steady, though her body trembled from the effort. The old reign is over. The empire built on blood and fear is finished. I am Seraphis, heir no longer to cruelty but to change, and I will not rule alone. She turned, her gaze falling on Ryland. He stood with blood staining his armor, his blade chipped and broken, yet his eyes steady. She extended her hand toward him. Gasps filled the chamber. The court could not believe what they were seeing. A princess, now a queen, reaching for a human. Ryland looked at her hand, then at the faces of the Valar around them. He knew what this meant. It was not only about her feelings, it was about a choice that would change everything. Slowly, he stepped forward and placed his hand in hers. Her voice carried across the chamber, clear and bold. I choose him. Not as prey, not as a trophy, but as my partner. He is proof that strength is not only born of blood but of spirit, and with him, we will build a new empire, one not of fear, but of hope. The chamber erupted with noise. Some nobles screamed. In outrage, others whispered in shock, but there were also voices rising in support. The seeds of doubt planted earlier now bloomed into something stronger. Many had seen Ryland's defiance, his survival, his refusal to bow. They could not deny what their own eyes had witnessed. Ryland squeezed Seraphis's hand, his voice carrying over the storm. You've seen what I am. I'm human. I bleed, I fall, I get back up. That's all I have. But if she'll have me, then I'll stand with her, not just against enemies, but for your future." The words echoed in the silence that followed, reaching even those who had never believed in humans. From that day, the war changed. The fall of the Queen sent ripples through the empire. Some loyalists clung to the old ways, fighting bitterly, but others flocked to Seraphis's banner. Her message spread, that strength was not only in bloodlines and fear, but in choice and courage. Humans, once treated as prey, were now seen as something different. They were allies, partners, equals. Rylan fought beside Seraphis in the days that followed, not as a prisoner, not as a pawn, but as her chosen warrior. Together they crushed the last of the loyalists, their bond growing stronger with every battle. The Accord, once at war with the Valar, hesitated, then sent envoys. The sight of a human standing beside the new queen changed everything. Xiao. Once there had been only hatred, there was now a chance for peace. Weeks later, the grand hall of the Valar throne was rebuilt. Its black stone walls were repaired, its broken pillars raised again. But the greatest change was not in the stone, but in the people who filled it. Humans stood among Valar, no longer as prisoners or soldiers for slaughter, but as honored guests. Nobles who once sneered at the idea now bowed their heads, unsure but willing to follow the new order. At the center of the hall, Seraphis stood dressed in silver, her crown gleaming faintly with firelight. Beside her was Rylan, his armor polished, his wounds healed, though the scars remained. Together they faced the assembly. Seraphis raised her voice, calm but firm. "I swore to build something new. Today I keep that vow. The old ways are gone. From this day forward, humans and Valar will stand together, and I will not hide what I feel. I love this human, and I claim him as my equal. Let all who live under this sky hear it. We are stronger together." The words shook the hall. For some it was unthinkable. For others, it was hope made real. The human soldiers who had survived cheered, their voices ringing. Some Valar joined, them hesitantly at first, then stronger. A roar of unity filled the throne hall, a sound no one could have imagined only weeks before. Rylan looked at Seraphis, his lips curving into a small smile. "You know, where I come from, when someone says something like that, there's usually a wedding." She tilted her head, her eyes glowing with amusement and fire. "Then let us not wait." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. A queen of the Valar and a human warrior, standing side by side, declaring their bond, before both their people. It was not just a union of hearts, but a symbol, a promise that the future could be different. That fear could give way to hope, that predator and prey could stand as equals. When it was done, when their hands were joined and their vows spoken, Seraphis leaned close and whispered words that only he could hear. "I told my mother once, I want this human, and I will never stop wanting you." Rylan smiled, his hand tightening around hers. "Then you'll never be without me, because humans don't break, remember?" The hall erupted in cheers, and for the first time in centuries, the Empire did not tremble with fear, but with something greater, with hope. And so, the story of the human warrior and the alien vampire princess spread across the stars, told in whispers and songs. Some hated it, some resisted it, but none could deny it. A human had stood against an empire and changed it, not with power, but with courage, and a princess had chosen love over fear, breaking the chains of her bloodline. Together, they began a new dawn, one that would shape the galaxy for ages to come.